Wait, remember when the journalist from PBS asked, she goes, to David, can I add you on LinkedIn? And he went, I don't have a LinkedIn, but you can follow me on Twitter.
I laughed. I genuinely couldn't keep it in.
It was so funny.
For like 3 minutes. We'll play that for you here. I can do that better. We'll play that for you here. This is where you can put it.
Thank you.
But you have to take this clip and put it at the beginning.
Yes.
Allie knows.
We're gonna redo the intro.
Stay mad. Stay mad.
Hey guys, this is
Kate, Rosa,
Allie.
and Alora from Loco Mag, and we are here today to talk about an interview that two of us had with David Hogg, who is a very respected, very kind, very intelligent young man.
So Allie and I got to talk to David Hogg on the day that he visited our campus to give a talk about the March for Our Lives book, A Glimmer of Hope.
You talked a lot about being here wanting to start more chapters. Can you talk about what would be involved if I started a chapter? Like, what does that mean for students to do?
Yeah, so if you were to start a chapter, basically you'd be working on holding town halls to get your local representatives to be good on gun violence prevention, and basically pressure them to, if they already say they are good, to actually be good as well. You'd be registering voters across, in your community, at your school, wherever your chapter may be, and also using it as an opportunity to work on, art projects for gun violence prevention to help make this issue more human, and really chapter, statewide projects with the entire state chapter, with the dozens of other chapters in the state of Pennsylvania, to go and knock on doors, and say do you know about gun violence prevention? Do you know about the March for Our Lives peace plan that could reduce gun violence by 50% in 10 years, and it really helping educate other young people across the state, and making gun violence a priority for presidential candidates.
And just sharing that knowledge with people who wouldn't know it otherwise. How important do you think social media is as a tool in getting young people involved and getting them to actually register to vote and go?
Yeah, I think social media is a really important tool to start stuff, but young people should not forget and should realize that, if all you can do is tweet, okay, that's still useful, but if you have just a little more time, try to go and knock on some doors, work on a presidential campaign, and create a March for Our Lives chapter to make a peace a priority for presidential candidates, and spread awareness about how gun violence prevention it may currently be a political issue, but in reality isn't at all. It's not. Americans dying should not be a political issue, and creating a country that values and electing politicians that value and protect children more than they protect guns should not be political. Because our children and the future of the United States of America as Americans should always be our first priority. But currently it is not.
You were talking a lot about this earlier. We sat in on your other session. But from a young activist standpoint, do you worry a lot when you have to admit that there's something that you don't know? Do you think that that's something, do you worry that that's something that somebody might take in opposition of you, oh, you're young, you don't know anything, or is that something that you take in stride and, you use that learning curve to make it better?
No, I definitely, my favorite moments are when I know what I don't know.
Yeah.
Because that's half the battle, is knowing what you don't know. The rest is answering the question, which is the easy part. I think you should always try to educate yourself as much as possible. If you're doing work in gun violence prevention, reading a couple books never can hurt. To know about the policies that can help, reduce gun violence. But also having candid and honest conversations offline, in person, with people that don't agree with you is extremely important. Because what it helps you recognize is that the real enemy in this fight is not other Americans, it's not Republicans, it's not Democrats, it's not even NRA members. or gun owners like my father. The real enemy in this fight is the violence that infects people's minds and causes them to pull a trigger in the first place, and the laws and corruption that have enabled the lack of laws and corruption that have enabled mass shooters and the perpetrators of gun violence to get their hands on a weapon in the first place.
Did you have it? I know you had a lot of questions written down.
I don't have my glasses on, so you put my notebook very far away. I was
I'm
like,
sorry.
oh, no, that's my own fault. I'm an adult who should remember her own glasses. One of the things that struck me a lot about, especially in reading a lot of coverage about gun violence, is that, sometimes it's almost like the media's priority to make it just a mental health issue or just, something else, as opposed to something that's also a gun issue. So why do you think that that's, like, the first job?
The reason why mass shootings are typically always covered as a mental health issue, to be frank, is because as Americans, the media or rather, let me start that over. The reason why the media always tries to frame this as a mental health issue is because Americans are not comfortable talking about the history of white supremacy and white nationalism that lasts to this day in this country. They always say, for example, the shooter in Parkland was mentally ill, which, obviously, if somebody wants to hurt somebody else, like, they're not super sane, but, like, what is actually causing them to act on that in the first place, right? Because I would argue, more than a mental illness, what probably played a significantly higher role in the 34 people at my high school being shot and the 17 being killed was the fact that a 19-year-old was able to get their hands on an AR-15, even though the police were called on them multiple times because there were no laws in place to stop that in the first place, and also they could buy an AR-15, period. And secondly, the white nationalist propaganda on his phone and anti-Semitic propaganda on his phone that he had, right? And, Stoneman Douglas High School had a very large Jewish population in the first place. And obviously, I think that played significantly more of a role than somebody just being mentally ill. And along with that, I think what we have to recognize as well is the people that are mentally ill are way more likely to be the victims of gun violence rather than the perpetrators. Mm-hmm. Because oftentimes our police forces are not given the proper training to know when somebody has, be it a learning disability, such as like Asperger's or autism, or even a mental illness like schizophrenia. And sometimes that can cause them to shoot and kill someone that's mentally ill that was never actually a danger in the first place. And on top of that, majority of gun deaths are suicides. Because in America, in every community, it is easier to pick up a gun to end the pain that depression and despair brings you than it is to pick up a phone to call a quality, affordable therapist in the first place. So, yeah, to wrap it up, I think that mental illness is an extremely convenient scapegoat to not talk about racism and hatred and white supremacy.
I got most of mine in already, but
So I think the last thing that we had talked about that we wanted to ask you is, like, what keeps you hopeful, and what do you think is next for you and for March for Our Lives?
Yeah, what keeps me hopeful is the young people across Pennsylvania and across the country that are honestly kicking ass. Like, we had the highest youth voter turnout pretty much in American history in a non-presidential midterm last year. We literally doubled that in, like, basically 6 months by, like, going out there and registering kids to vote and going out there and encouraging people to vote in the first place. And if we can do that again, and we can get some, for example, my goal is 71% youth voter turnout for 2020. If we can get that in Pennsylvania, it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican president that's elected, because young people, as the largest voting bloc in America, will have to be the priority of any politician, be it a mayor, a congressman, a senator, a governor, or the president of the United States. Will have to care about young people and whether or not they die inside or outside of their classrooms as a result of preventable gun violence on a daily basis. And what we need people to do to make this possible, though, is to create March for Our Lives chapters across the country and across Pennsylvania. And we need people in Pennsylvania to make this their top voting issue, or one of their top voting issues. Because I guarantee you, the second they say to any presidential candidate, where is your comprehensive plan to save the thousands of children that die every day, or every year from gun violence, rather, I guarantee you those presidential candidates are going to get that plan together real soon.
Awesome. I would hope so.
And
Hopefully.
if kids want to start a chapter, or if any young people want to start a chapter at their college, in their hometown, or both, they can go to marchforourlives.com. And if there's anybody that would like to just sign up for updates about what's going on in their state or support March for Our Lives, they can also go there and sign up at marchforourlives.com.
The thing I was most excited to ask him was about where they see March for Our Lives going next, and he talked a lot about their peace plan, which I
Yeah.
actually read a lot. Actually, after we talked to him, I joined the chapter of March for Our Lives.
Did you?
I did, and not just because like I really liked what he was saying, but because it was something that I like had wanted to do before and just kind of kept putting off. And then when I went and looked at the peace plan and I looked at what everybody else is saying about gun control, especially in like the Democratic primary, and how the only person that was talking about it was Beto O'Rourke, and now he's not running for president anymore. So it's like, okay, well, nobody's really like it's almost like nobody gives a shit, which is why I was so eager to talk to him, because I was like, okay, well, what keeps you hopeful? Like, what makes you want to keep doing this? Because let's be real, they don't have actually getting out there and like people knowing your face and your name and your issue and your cause is success in one thing, but nothing has happened.
Yeah.
Which is more an indictment, I think, on our society and our government than a bunch of, kids that are in high school or were in high school, I don't know. It's just, it's not their fault that nothing has happened. It's the fact that people don't want to change.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, what are you hopeful about now? And he said, all the young people who actually really want to do this and want to see something happen. Like, it's not their fault that they're not a successful movement, because in the fact that we all know what it is, like I just said, which you can cut this out, but
It's reception.
Yeah.
and what you do with the thing that you're learning about is up to you. But if you're not going to do anything with it, I don't know. Maybe I'm just, and I wanted to say this to him, but I was like, I'm cynical, so I don't know how you're like. I want something to happen.
I want to believe that
Sucks
something will happen.
about interviewing someone that's in politics or is dealing with a political issue, which you'd think that like keeping people alive isn't necessarily
Politics. It's
politics,
Yeah, it's not.
but everything is inherently political,
Yes.
which fine, whatever. But I don't know. I feel like everything sounds like a stump speech, which isn't. I feel like Rose is making a face that's going to say like this is what she's going to say about the main event, which I don't want to. Like, I don't want to criticize that, because I do think that what he's trying to get across is really important to him and also really important to me. Like, I wouldn't have gone on their website and wanted to join a chapter and go to events and get their emails if I didn't care about what he was saying, you know what I mean? Like, but it's so hard to... We sat through 2 of his other interviews, and everything he said to us was what he said to them. And I get it.
Yeah.
It's all about keeping the messaging cohesive
Concise.
and concise
Yeah.
and clear and streamlined, and this is what I want your audience to hear, and what I want the radio audience to hear, and what I want that PBS is it PBS?
It was PBS.
What I want that PBS station to hear. Like, I get it,
Yeah.
but I don't.
It was
And,
also just.
and I also don't think it had anything to do. And we don't have to put any of this in. I don't think it had anything to do with any of our questions. It really was just like he would kind of.
He would like flip it
He would flip it
to be like, here's the
to
answer I
get
want to
the
give you, no
message.
matter what
He's
you
going to be
ask
a
me.
great House representative
Oh,
when
yeah,
he decides to run on a ticket one day.
I think you also asked
David
him
Hogg. Check.
at the end. I forget how we phrased it. Why is
Oh,
I can't. You,
well, I
yes.
asked him why everyone. This is, I think, the most interesting thing that he talks
It
about
was
a lot.
Yeah.
I asked him why he thinks personally, not just like from the standpoint of being a spokesperson and a board
Yeah.
member for this organization, why he thinks that media outlets tend to take gun violence and not make it a gun issue, but only make it a mental health issue, whereas sometimes it is both of those things.
Right.
And he talks a lot about how you can't just get on the phone and find an affordable, good therapist ever. Like, it's so hard. It's hard even at a small university to get a counseling appointment unless you're, you know, a danger to yourself or someone else.
Right.
Like, they'll be like, okay, we'll see you in a month. Like, it's not, and that's how, there are people who can't get appointments from their, like, actual insured doctors for, like, 4 months. Like, you just, it doesn't get better in those 4 months if you're not getting any help. And that was what he talked a lot about, where he was like, it shouldn't be easier when you're feeling some kind of pain or dealing with something to get a
Purchase a
gun
gun.
Yeah.
than it is to get a doctor's appointment. Which I think, I mean, he talks about everybody, which I think he talked more about that than, like, why it's a media thing, but I think he more
did.
wanted to say, like, it's so much easier to demonize people for having mental health issues and not for, like, being able to get a gun.
Yeah. I think that also has a lot to do with the political atmosphere, like, right now, because there are a lot of people who are from different backgrounds, different generations, whatnot, who don't believe in mental health problems and don't think that that is, like, a valid thing, a valid reason. And now it's coming to light that it is, and it affects people everywhere. I mean, we can kind of see that through, we read it through the book, like, there so many violent events occur because people can't get help
And there are
for
also
things, and it's not addressed.
And there are also big violent events that occur because nobody's addressing things like white supremacy and
Right.
like toxic masculinity, things that aren't mental health problems. Like, we're not talking about just like systemic racism and systemic sexism, and there are things that we just don't talk about that also contribute to violence, and especially violence against like, so many of these shootings start because, like, oh, she didn't like me, so now I'm going to shoot up the whole school. Like, that's how a lot of these things, there are so many instances where, now I'm rambling, but there are so many instances where, like, it has nothing to do with, like, somebody was perfectly fine and just didn't have a lot of friends, and then they went and they just grabbed their dad's gun. See, this is where David Hogg and I tend to disagree on things, because he's like, well, we don't want to take all your guns. I'm like, I do. This is going to be on the internet. And I'm like, no, you shouldn't. You don't need a gun. For what? What do you need a gun for? And, like, even so many of the big mass shootings that we hear about, it's like, oh, well, he went into his father's gun case and grabbed his dad's gun and shot a bunch of people. I don't know.
Yeah, everything you, like, basically just talked about, like, happened in my area, like, my hometown. Right, like, a month after the Parkland shooting, there was a shooting at the high school that I graduated from. But obviously I was a sophomore here, so, like, I wasn't there, but, like, my best friend still went there, and, like, that's my school, that's my community. And a kid was broken up with by he got dumped, and, you know, I don't know what went on, but he couldn't cope with it, and he took his dad's gun, and he brought it to school, and he tried to shoot her, and he ended up shooting another kid in the leg, and he did shoot her in the head. And then, you know, the school security officer, you know, that there was that whole confrontation, and, like, it stopped. He was killed before anyone else could get hurt, but then, you know, she was in the hospital for a while, brain dead, and her family pulled the plug, so she died, and another kid got shot because it's, like you said, it's not just one thing. There's all of these things in place where, you know, he needed to get help to deal with these things, or toxic masculinity, or why does he even have, as a minor, why does he even have access to his dad's gun? It should be locked. You shouldn't know the code. Like, you shouldn't have access at all. And then, you know, not like criticized, but, like, there's no type of security at the school where, like, there's, and the reason that schools don't have metal detectors is because they don't want to have metal detectors, and then people assume it's a bad school, but it's just an added safety measure. And now they do have all these extra safety measures at my school where, like, you have to wait to be buzzed in, you have to show all this, but all that kind of stuff to me is, like, it's not really addressing the issue, because the person who brought the gun to school was a student, and students don't have to check in the morning. They just walk right into the school. Guests have to check in, but the person who had a gun and did the damage was a student, and they don't get checked. So the extra security measures aren't really fixing the problem.
I also think it's taking a lot of like resources and time and energy and effort to put these extra security measures in place when the root of the problem isn't being addressed,
Yeah.
so it's not going to change. Like, I think there's just too much focus on, well, how do we prevent school shootings instead of, well, let's reform our bills, like let's get actual government political action like set and get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out.
It's become this thing of, well, how do we prevent this type of shooting? Not how do we prevent shooting
Right.
Yeah.
from happening at all? Which, and I know that this is just me, and I know people will never give up their guns or whatever the hell Meghan McCain was saying on the fucking View the other day. But like, just, I'll never understand how the root of the problem always becomes something that's not guns. And
Yeah.
I actually do understand. It's because it's all about money and who's giving money to people who like guns. And the people who like guns have all this money because nothing ever happens to them. Whatever, it's fine. It's fine. I'm really annoyed.
Yeah, my favorite quote is, guns don't kill people, people kill people. I'm
people
like, dog.
with guns kill people, guys.
Yes, that's exactly my take on it. It's,
Gun's not going to pull
it's
the trigger.
ridiculous. Like, if I came to school with a knife, the amount of damage I can do in 30 seconds is so much smaller than the amount of damage I could do if I had, like, an automatic
If I
rifle.
came into school with my bare hands, could I kill 50 people in 10 minutes? No, I don't think I could. But you know what? I just don't understand. I did want to ask you about the main big book talk event though,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I read the book and I had to go to class. I couldn't go. But
Yeah, there were a lot of things that I liked. Like, he did touch on a lot of those issues that you were talking about. Like, he was talking about, like, systemic racism and oppression and, like, mental health and all these different things. And I did like, he talked about, like, someone asked him a question when he talked about, like, my school definitely would have got the coverage. It wouldn't have gotten the coverage that it gotten by the media if we had been in a lower income area, or if my school was majority, like, minorities and stuff like that, which I thought was great. And he hit on a lot of things that I think a lot of people try to push to the side and act like it's not a problem and that we don't have all these systemic issues in our country.
you mean how we're not talking about like the way that other people mentioned, like we don't talk about gun violence in Chicago. We don't talk about. I didn't know. The interviewers asked David Hogg about a shooting that had happened in Philly the day before, and
Yes.
I had known nothing about it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, so it's all those
It's
things,
bad.
but, like, obviously there's always something to critique, and my students and I debriefed the class after. We talked a lot about, like, you were talking about how he did come off certain times as very, like, this is like my speech and this is what I'm going to say and I'm just going to stick to it.
Very scripted.
Very scripted, and very much like they were saying, my students were saying, like, kind of like politician-y, like didn't want to, he very much would like run around questions. Like, there was one student who asked him about, you know, when there's a conflict within the movement, with the leaders, like what you're going to do next or how you're going to address something, how do you decide how to move forward? And he just like didn't answer that
that's
at all.
a great question.
It is a good
It
question.
was fantastic, and my first year seminar that I peer mentor focuses on strategic nonviolence and civil disobedient movements and how they create change and successes and failures. So I thought it was fantastic, but he didn't answer the question at all. Didn't discuss conflict or any type of way. He just talked about how they decide what they're going to do, which to me I was like, you didn't answer the question at all. And he did that a couple times during the question and answer session. And my students, when we were talking about it, somebody said that they kind of interpreted it as like he didn't have enough time for his actual speech, so he was using the Q&A to like say the points that he didn't get the chance to say and like throw them out there so people could still hear them.
I get that a lot of what you have to do in this kind of activism, and when you're like the recognizable face of a movement, probably because he's like the smart, skinny white kid. Not to take that away from, he's very smart and he's very well spoken and he had a lot of really cool things to say, but like part of it is the repetitive messaging. But when your time is opened up and people ask you questions, not because they're trying to trap you to get you to say something, but because
Because
maybe
they're genuinely interested.
Yeah,
Maybe
like it was
because
students. It wasn't
they're-
Right.
reporters. And
they're
yeah.
social justice minded people, or we wouldn't have had. We're all seniors. This is the 4th year of a social justice minded person coming to this campus to address students. Like, it's not, and it wouldn't be these kinds of people if it's not what the students wanted to see, and if it wasn't what, like, nobody's calling David Hogg to be like, hey, we're gonna come talk at our this event, you know what I mean? That's not gonna be receptive to what he has to say. Like, well, I don't get how you don't answer that question.
I think it might have something to do with like vulnerability, because when you were talking about how nothing really is happening with this movement, and they're struggling with like support and with like actual events and like getting reform and whatnot. I think maybe not answering a question that has something to do with how vulnerable they can be has something to do with making sure that there's nothing that people who want to trap them, people who, you know, don't like their ideas, they can possibly use in a conversation.
I had asked him about that when we talked to him, because I was like, well, is it hard for you to sometimes admit that there are things that you don't know, that there are knowledge gaps in your movement like, you're all for lack of a better word, you're kids or you're young adult students generally, you know, like, there are obviously going to be things that you don't know. So, like, and I asked him, I was like, is that something that you guys take in stride, or is that hard for you? And I mean, he turned it around to be like, well, we like to learn things. I was like, well, that's not what I said, but I mean.
He was like, I go to these people to get my information.
That is kind of what I wanted him to say, in a sense of like, well, you know, how do you deal with that? How are you dealing with that? Like, what are you doing to make that better? But I did almost want him to, not like almost want him to say that, but sometimes I think to get the kinds of people involved with your movement that you want to be involved, you can't just be like, everything is perfect and clean in this, because then people who don't feel that way are going to be discouraged from joining your movement.
Right.
Yeah, and my whole thing with the questions was like, Allie said, like, it's students, like, they're people who are like your age, who like are genuinely interested, and those questions were hand selected. Like, there's a whole process. They don't get to just like go up and ask. Like, they submit them, they're pre-screened. There are all these sessions where they revise the question so that it's going to be well received and it's something that they can answer and things like that. And I can assume, I don't know for sure, but I would guess that like David Hogg's team got to like look at them in advance and screen them as well. Yeah. So you already know what they're going to ask you. You know, it's not like they're putting you on the spot. You should be prepared for that. And instead of like turning the question, like avoiding answering the actual question and getting out a different type of message, like just answer the question. Just like answer the fucking question.
I mean, overall, it was a really cool thing to be able to get to do.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
there were things I wish that, like, not had gone differently, but, like, things that I definitely wish we could have asked him. Because they got us as much time as they could.
They did.
Like, it wasn't it wasn't for lack of other people trying. And the fact that we even got in the door is, like, a whole... That's huge. Like, that's really, really cool. And I hope that the people who come after us get to do this again.
Yes.
But, yeah, I mean, as much... It kind of sucks to only get that much time.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot of time.
It sucked. I also think it sucked for that, like, small group to only get... Was it 40 minutes? It wasn't an hour.
It was... I'll look at the voice recording. I think it was 30, maybe 40 minutes.
Yeah.
It wasn't a lot of time.
They did that small group session where, like, students could ask him questions that weren't, like... It didn't seem... Most of them weren't pre-screened.
There were
2 or 3 people that had sent their questions ahead of time, and then it became, like, people asking their own questions.
Like, just raise your hand and, like...
Which was
get
cool.
called on.
And I felt like that was the most, like, productive of what I think I learned about what they what he does and what their whole movement does. But I really was surprised that nobody asked them about, like, how they haven't really gotten anything done. And I do think that their peace plan is really cool, but I think they're going to have a hard time unless, like, a legitimate, not that Beto O'Rourke wasn't a legitimate candidate, but if, like, if a person with a legitimate path to the nomination for the presidency adopts and gets behind their plan, like,
it's not really going to do
nothing's
much.
going to happen, which sucks. Yeah. But nothing's going to happen. Yeah. I'm cynical.
Yeah.
Nothing changes if nothing changes, right?
Factually true, yes. I don't know. I thought it was great, and in general, like, obviously this is a movement that I support, but in general, I do have a lot of respect for him and for other leaders of the movement because they have to get up in front of a lot of people all the time and just, like, repeat a traumatic experience, which, like, I cannot imagine doing so frequently. But they're so passionate and they believe in this and care about enacting change so strongly that they do it, and I have a lot of respect for them for that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I wasn't there for the interview.
You read the book.
I did.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of the book?
It was passionately written. It was well written. It was very informative. It's a great book to get background on
It's
this cause.
It's-
And no, you're okay. And it really kind of puts things in perspective. So I think that, yeah, I would definitely recommend the book. I respect the movement. I respect him. And I mean, I really hope to see reform. I really hope to see change in the future.
I think it's really cool that the book's not just some like March for Our Lives manifesto.
Yeah.
That it's like, here's how we got. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Like that's the kind of stuff that you have on your website. But like to be able to sit there and be like, okay, well, this is what. To read something that was written by people our own age
Yeah.
about an issue that I think generally we're all kind of afraid we're going to have to face in our lives, not just school shootings, but like just being shot in a hospital or at a concert or at a work party that happened 2 years ago maybe, just like, or our kids one day still having to deal with this kind of thing. Like it's really interesting to actually read something that was written by someone your own age for everyone, not just for people of their own age. And I mean, to get to see the process of how they got to be an organization and to be a movement is really cool, but I'd like to see them address that like more needs to be happening.
Yeah.
And I get that keeping the movement young is really important, but young people are the future of the country just by definition of being young.
But we're not the present.
But we're
We need
not.
support.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you have to convince, and that's definitely the hardest thing for them, I would think, is that you have to convince older people
Yeah.
that you're right.
As like an 18-year-old.
As an 18,
college
19-year-old.
student. Yeah.
And I do remember him saying, I think he's the only, if this is wrong, we can cut it. He's the only, like, white guy on their board.
I think he did say
Which is
that. I
cool.
was, yeah. But I don't, when he was explaining the board, I got confused.
I was also very
confused. Very confused.
You just reminded me of something where on like one of the university pages on Instagram they posted like a picture and we're like talking about the
We
event.
should talk about this.
Yes, they were
Wait, what is
talking about
this?
the event and they're like, thank you David Hogg for coming and blah 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 this and that. And like the first few comments
Bunch of
were
old
from
white guy
like
alums.
alumni who were very
Oh,
angry
shit.
that he had been the speaker. Let me find, yeah. So the first one, someone commented, shouldn't you be in school? And the second one,
He had the day off from school.
And he
and
was
the
going
second
back.
one was saddened to see this. As an alumni, I'm embarrassed to see this. So many untruths and false narratives. And the first one really
That
made
might have
me
been the
mad.
comment I replied to,
I
and
think
then I
it is,
deleted
yeah.
my reply because I was like, I don't need to be like fighting with some old white guy on Instagram.
Yeah, the shouldn't you be in school? I was like, the reason this event is so early is because he has to catch a flight so that he can go to class.
They
the next
literally
morning, but like,
reworked
thank
the
you
whole
for your
thing.
concern.
Not to mention, bringing up something like "shouldn't you be in school" might be a little traumatic to someone who had to deal with what
school
he's
shooting.
talking about during school. That just makes me mad.
The general opposition that young people have to receive from baby boomers,
Oh, God.
like, is so I just mean generally in terms of politics. Like, how often are you told that you don't know anything about anything?
Very
And just wait until you've experienced the real world, and then you'll vote for a Republican. Gee.
No.
I don't think that's how it works. I think I've been
Thanksgiving?
living in the real world for my entire life. The world doesn't become real
When you reach
When
a
I
certain
graduate.
when
age.
you are 22 and have a full-time job. The world is very real from the moment you were born. I just don't
Yeah.
get
The
it.
world
Yeah,
is very
especially-
different, but it's very real.
And especially
real
like, people
world.
have different
Shut the fuck up.
experiences at like different times. Like, did you experience like a mass shooting when you were in high school? No, because I'm pretty sure that's very real. Like, everyone has different experiences, and I think that a lot of people think that if you don't experience things a certain way and the way that they do and the way that like society used to dictate you should experience things, then like you don't have a legitimate experience, you don't know what you're talking about, you haven't experienced shit.
I also just had this thought of let kids vote.
Let kids vote.
Let them vote. Like, if we're old enough to be shot in school, I'm old enough to go to the polls. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
whatever. Just vote. That was another big
Please
thing
do the voting.
that David Hogg was talking about. I know
Yeah.
that election day already happened, but that doesn't mean that a very important election
Is not
isn't coming
right
up
around the
in
corner.
less
It
than
is.
1 year.
Less than
Terrifying.
1 year.
Wow.
Please vote.
Yeah.
Vote.
Register to vote.
Register now.
Tell your friends to register to vote.
You can
Run
register to vote at 16.
Run-
16.
run a voting registration drive wherever you might be listening to this. Like, there's no excuse not to. If you can vote, if you are allowed to vote, if you're old enough, if you haven't been disenfranchised for some racist or classist reason, vote. It's so not hard. It is literally the least that you can do. You don't have to go to a rally. You don't have to protest. You don't have to do anything. It is
Just
so much
have
more
to
effective
show up.
than
You go to
tweeting.
a place, you press a couple buttons, and then you get a really cute sticker.
Or you can get your absentee ballot and you can send it
And you
in from
send
your
it in.
house or
You
wherever
don't have
you
to
are.
go anywhere.
Yeah,
Don't.
you don't
It
have
is-
to leave.
you don't
They'll
even
bring
have
it to
leave-
you.
You don't even have to leave your house to register to vote. Voting is so easy. Why don't people do it?
Yes, but it's also very important to mention that don't go into an election blind. Do not vote blind.
Here's the other thing.
Know what you want to see happen.
But so here's the thing. I really do think that even if people do go into it blind, like
Just do
the
it.
more
At least you're
people that
voting.
vote, it makes a difference. Like, people don't think that not voting doesn't make a difference, and I have never understood that. Because if everybody voted, something would happen. Like, I saw somebody put under not my go vote Facebook post, but someone else's that was like that stupid Mark Twain quote that's like, well, if voting ever did anything, then everybody would do it. I was like, I think it's the opposite. Like,
Yeah, this is literally what I just wrote about for this issue. Is about like people who are apathetic, who are like, it doesn't affect me, or like, I don't care. You should care. You should care about so many things for so many reasons. Like, do something. Don't just sit there and let things happen. Like, do something about it. Have an opinion. Have a thought.
there's also somebody out there that definitely thinks what you think. Like,
oh, yeah.
and if there's not, go be that person.
be
Run.
that person.
If you
for
don't
someone
think there's
else.
anybody out there that believes what you believe or is running for what you freaking believe in, then run. That's not hard either. It's
No.
like 2 fucking signatures at City Hall. Just, I don't know. I'm so frustrated with the world. Things are different when people vote. The House in Virginia just flipped. The governor of Kentucky is a Democrat, which is the craziest sentence in the world. Like, things happen when people vote. And David Hogg talked a lot about that.
He did. I think he gave us like a little spiel about voting.
Like, we
So we
weren't
can put that
registered
in.
to vote. It's like, I
just
vote.
making sure.
I was like, I vote, Dave. I did. Anybody have final thoughts? Should we wrap this up
Probably.
before I start yelling about voting again?
In conclusion, thank you, David Hogg.
Yes.
Check out Glimmer of Hope. It's a really good read. Check out March for Our Lives. Join your local chapter. Do your research and vote. Do the thing.
Do it.
Do it.
Thanks to everybody that made sure that Allie and I could
Yes.
do this interview, like Michael Dwyer, Rachel Collins, and everyone else that was involved that let us do
Into
this
that
really
room.
cool thing.
Yeah.
And let all of our, LinkedIn followers and our Facebook friends know that we did something cool. So thank you for listening. One more time, I'm Kate.
I'm Rosa.
I'm Alora.
I'm Allie.
You should keep checking out Local Mag and everything that we've done so far and everything we're going to continue to do. You can also join a local March for Our Lives chapter or start your own if you don't have one. And just keep going, man.
And vote.
And vote.
Vote a lot.
Please vote.
All right.
Sick.
Okay. We're done.